Chimpanzees may look harmless, but the truth is that they are highly efficient killing machines, capable of tearing off people's limbs and eating them. 5 men go to visit a great ape sanctuary, but what they don't know is that there has been a massive escape, and now they're heading straight into the eye of the storm toward a furious horde of chimpanzees. A couple, saddened by their daughter leaving home, decides to buy a newborn baby chimp to care for and make it their new purpose in life. However, one day, that same animal becomes responsible for the most brutal and bloody attack ever recorded. All this and more you'll see now. This is one of the most brutal and horrifying chimpanzee cases ever recorded. In the 1990s, in the forests of Sierra Leone, nature flowed normally until a war began, bringing with it an extreme demand for land, fuel, and natural resources. One of the consequences was that the chimpanzee population lost territory and was slaughtered. The landscape was no longer beautiful. It had become a terrible scene. The once thriving primate population became scarce, reduced to only a few thousand due to habitat destruction and the merciless killing carried out by soldiers. Men would usually kill adult chimpanzees and kidnap the infants to sell them as pets to tourists. This situation caused an international outcry, and animal rights activists called for the creation of a shelter or refuge where these animals could be protected from slaughter and human greed. In this context, the Tacugama sanctuary emerged as a beacon of hope. It was a refuge located near the capital of Sierra Leone. At Tacugama, mistreated chimpanzees could find shelter and protection from the soldiers' abuse. For these primates, the massacre had been their first contact with humanity. Those who didn't die watched their own die and were tortured for days at the mercy of human amusement. All of this left such a deep and devastating impact that it became permanently engraved in the minds of these creatures. And unlike other animals, they possess higher intelligence, meaning they could remember and hold grudges. In 2006, Alan Robertson, Gary Brown, and Richie Goody were subcontractors working on the construction of the U.S. Embassy building in Sierra Leone when they received the opportunity to visit the Tacugama Chimpanzee Sanctuary. At that time, this place attracted visitors from around the world, raising awareness about the consequences of human expansion and cruelty toward local wildlife. The invitation to visit Tacugama came through a friend and local guide named Melvin Mama. With everyone on board, the 4 men called a taxi and headed toward the site. They were excited. The driver was Issa Canoe. The car traveled for 30 minutes, climbing hills and passing through dirt roads. It was April 23rd. Inside the vehicle, the men talked about their expectations. It was clear they were eager to arrive. The beautiful landscape made everything even more interesting, and Melvin shared a bit about the history of Sierra Leone. However, far from there, while the men spoke enthusiastically, something was going terribly wrong inside the reserve. At Tacugama, the impossible happened. The paradise, built for rescued animals, was experiencing its worst nightmare. Sanctuary staff were feeding the chimpanzees when a group of them became enraged and managed to escape their enclosure by breaking through the fence surrounding the complex. This triggered absolute chaos, and all workers were forced to flee for their own safety. The furious primates were tearing apart anything in their path, including people. But this was only the beginning. The most determined group was made up of 30 adult chimpanzees, led by an alpha male later identified as Bruno, a 265-pound 6-foot-tall individual. He had suffered severe trauma after being taken from his mother as an infant shortly after witnessing his entire family being killed by humans. He had been sold on the black market for just a few dollars. In chimpanzee culture, the biggest and most aggressive male is not always the one who leads the group. The elders can choose a leader they consider most capable. Even if a strong, powerful male could defeat his rivals, the elders could still deny him leadership. Alphas are responsible for caring for and protecting the entire troop, without exception. In Bruno's case, he was the strongest, the tallest, and valued by the elders. Bruno was the unquestionable leader. However, Bruno seemed to harbor a deep hatred for humans. Despite the kindness he later received, the hatred he had first experienced seemed burned into his memory in a way that could never be erased. Soon, he would cross paths with more people, The men's vehicle finally arrived at the Tacugama sanctuary, but the gates were closed, a very strange sight. It should have been open. They had no idea what could have happened. Confused, they walked around the front of the place looking for someone who could explain what was going on. The driver, Issa, honked the horn, hoping someone would answer, but nothing. However, the noise made by the men attracted the attention of the worst creature they could have alerted. Terrifying screams echoed from the trees, making the men lock themselves inside the car. Seconds later, accompanied by a bloodthirsty group, Bruno appeared. The chimpanzees surrounded the car, screaming and pounding on the windows and doors. The men watched in horror. Issa shifted into reverse and slammed down on the accelerator. The car shot backward violently, and Bruno began chasing them with his troop. Even then, the car wasn't fast enough. The animals leaped onto the hood, screaming furiously and pounding on the windows. If they managed to get inside, it would be a massacre. As the car sped on, Bruno shifted his focus to the rear window, smashing the glass and starting his attack by mutilating Melvin. Bruno bit Melvin's hand while shaking his head violently, tearing flesh and bone. As Melvin screamed in pain, he fought to push Bruno away with the help of his friends, but Bruno was far too strong. Desperate to escape, one of the men shouted for Issa to shift the car forward. When he did, the vehicle jerked violently and changed direction. Bruno, whose teeth were deeply sunk into Melvin's arm, was caught off guard by the sudden movement and was thrown out of the same window he had entered through. Alan and Gary held Melvin as the shock of the attack wore off, and the pain began to take over. To Melvin's horror and disbelief, nearly half his hand, along with 3 fingers, was gone. Gary tried to calm him down while ripping a piece of his shirt to wrap the wound. Issa was losing control. Fear and panic were overwhelming him. He was a local from Sierra Leone and knew exactly what chimpanzees were capable of. He knew they could tear a human apart in seconds. He abandoned all caution and drove straight toward the locked sanctuary gate. His intention was to break through it with the car. As the others begged him to slow down, the vehicle crashed into the heavy metal gate. The impact was so violent that it knocked everyone unconscious for a moment. Gary woke up to the agonizing sound of Melvin's screams. As he looked around the now destroyed vehicle, he realized everyone was gone. He was alone inside the car. Gary turned his eyes toward the direction of the screams, only to witness Bruno dragging the defenseless Melvin away from the vehicle as the ferocious horde began devouring him. Determined to save his friend, Gary jumped out of the car and grabbed a sharp piece of wood. He shouted furiously, hoping to draw Bruno's attention away from Melvin. Most wild chimpanzees avoid direct confrontation with humans, even though they are physically much stronger, because the human posture makes us appear taller and intimidating. Domesticated chimpanzees, however, or at least those who have lived a long time around humans, like Bruno, quickly learn the physical advantage they have over people. Bruno accepted the challenge and charged toward Gary, slapping and waving his arms while standing upright on his hind legs to appear taller. Bruno was about 6 feet tall, and Gary was about 5 feet 9 inches. Even so, Gary remained calm when the beast lunged at him. Gary lifted his improvised weapon and struck Bruno in the neck, knocking him down. Bruno tried to get up, but Gary didn't allow it. Bruno's troop froze in fear as Gary struck him repeatedly with the wooden shard. Bruno eventually gave up and began showing submission, backing into the forest until he disappeared. Seeing their leader defeated, the chimpanzees fell silent and dispersed through the forest. Gary turned his attention to Melvin and tried to help him stand. Melvin could no longer stand on his own. Bruno seemed to have torn off most of his right foot. After ensuring the animals had fled, Gary told him he would go look for help. As he moved through the unfamiliar forest, he eventually found Richie and Alan. He instructed them to go seek assistance while he returned to Melvin. Before they left, they realized Issa was nowhere to be seen. Richie told Gary that after Issa tried to break through the gate, he had run out of the vehicle and fled, leaving the others behind as he headed toward the main road. Gary nodded, disappointed, and warned the men to stay alert. When he returned to Melvin, Gary tied another piece of cloth around his right foot to try to stop the bleeding. He carried him on his back as they followed the road. After some time, they encountered a military van, a patrol sent by Richie and Alan, who had reached a base for help. The soldiers picked them up and took them to a medical center. They were relieved, though unable to fully comprehend what had happened. But what they didn't know was that Issa did not have a happy ending. 2 days later, Issa was found in the woods completely torn apart. His blood-soaked body was missing its jaw and his internal organs were exposed. He was so devastated and unrecognizable that only a DNA test could confirm his identity. The chimpanzees had attacked him, tearing off his limbs and feeding on him. Out of the 30 chimpanzees that had escaped the reserve, 27 were recovered, but Bruno was not among them. Even after search efforts, he was never found. Some locals near the sanctuary claimed to have seen a large chimpanzee believed to be Bruno, but he always vanished. The group of men never forgot their terrifying encounter at the Tacugama sanctuary. They considered themselves lucky to have survived. Gary never fully understood how he managed to fight a taller, stronger chimpanzee and win, but he remained grateful that he did. In the wild, chimpanzees have a primitive and territorial instinct, but when they are raised in homes they can have a calmer behavior. Even so, they are not good pets. When someone buys a chimpanzee, they usually do so when it is still a baby, small and vulnerable. People believe it will form a family bond, but although they may seem affectionate when young, they grow quickly. They can reach a considerable height and become much stronger than a man. In addition, they can contract diseases. And the worst part is that if they don't have a healthy life, they can have bursts of aggressiveness and cause a tragedy. This is an extremely disturbing case, considered by many specialists the worst chimpanzee attack case in the United States. In 2003, Sandra and Jerome Harold, a couple from Stamford, Connecticut, had just said goodbye to their daughter Susan, who had recently gotten married. She would now live with her husband in a house that would mark the beginning of a new life. Sandra and Jerome were happy, but also sad. Susan was an only child, and now she would be far from them. They were a loving family, and now their home would feel emptier. Loneliness came knocking, and the couple decided to take action. At an exotic animal event, they managed to buy a small newborn chimpanzee for $50,000. They named him Travis. They incorporated him into their daily life. The baby chimp was allowed to roam freely around the house and had all the privileges of a child. He was treated like a son. The couple sat him at the table for meals, dressed him, and played with him. They began to see him more and more as a child every day. Travis was bringing meaning back into the home, giving Sandra and Jerome a sense of purpose. As Travis grew, he learned to behave like a person and could even communicate using hand gestures. The couple began renovating the house to adapt it to the animal's needs. They hung tires in the living room and other rooms. Travis would jump and swing while the couple worked and did household chores. The couple truly loved him. Travis was so well behaved that, when he went out with Sandra and Jerome, he behaved very well. The neighbors got to know him, and whenever they saw him, they greeted him. His friendliness won over the residents around them, and in a short time, he became popular. As an adult, he was able to dress himself, unlock doors with a key, and handle objects with precision. It was common to find him sitting on the couch watching television. He also learned how to turn on the family computer. His intelligence was surprising. During a trip to the supermarket, Jerome, Sandra, and Travis were in the car when they got stuck in a traffic jam. Travis, in the back seat, had the window open. A man threw a soda can at him. He became furious. Travis jumped out of the car and began chasing him, but could not catch him. Then he sat down on the road and started a scene. Police officers were called and, upon arrival, were faced with the unusual situation. When they approached the animal, he would run and jump on top of a car. After more than 2 hours trying to control the animal, Sandra and Jerome finally managed to get him back into the car. This incident led the authorities in Connecticut to pass a law stating that no one could own a primate as a pet. Travis, however, was not affected by this law because he had been with the family for a long time. In 2004, the worst happened. Jerome, who had cancer, ended up dying. That left Sandra and Travis alone. Jerome was to Travis the leader, and to Sandra the central bond of the family. The two felt the loss deeply, but Sandra was not going to give up Travis. Filled with sadness, Sandra ended up isolating herself. She was no longer the same. Her house became visibly neglected and the neighbors grew concerned. Officers from the Animal Control Department began knocking on her door, worried about her well-being. She was unwell and lacked the energy she once had, and Travis was now an adult, strong and tall. She could no longer take care of him as well. It would be very difficult for Sandra to control the animal if he had an outburst. However, Travis had never shown violence toward her, so she was not worried. The loss of her husband had left her so devastated that she no longer wanted to do anything other than sit on the couch. She didn't care about communicating with anyone. Only Travis interacted with her. She almost never left the house. The two began eating frozen food, and Travis became severely overweight. Travis looked visibly different. His once gentle appearance gave way to something much more mature and worn down. Sandra, however, had a friend she could always count on. She was one of the very few people Sandra still kept in touch with since Jerome's death. Charla had known the family since Travis was still a baby. She was a wonderful woman, always available to help anyone who needed it, especially her friends. Aware of Sandra's situation, Charla offered to help her. It was on Sunday, February 16, 2009, that Sandra called Charla, inviting her to her house. Charla had visited her many times before, and Sandra had no concern about her presence. That day, Travis's behavior was different. He seemed irritated. He didn't want to watch TV or eat his favorite ice cream that was in the freezer. Before arriving at her friend's house, Charla stopped by a salon and changed her haircut. At Sandra's house, Charla got out of the car holding a toy for Travis. She entered the house and spoke with Sandra, who said that Travis was acting strange, playing behind the house. Charla then went to meet the animal. Travis's reaction was the worst possible. He simply snapped. In a sudden burst of fury, he charged at Charla and knocked her down. He sat on top of her and, using all his strength, punched and tore off much of Charla's face, especially her facial features. Travis completely destroyed her face. Sandra tried to intervene, calling out to Travis, but he was completely out of control. Sandra called the police in total desperation. She then grabbed a knife and went into the yard. She approached from behind and wrapped her arm around Travis's neck. Using all her strength, she pulled. Travis released Charla and turned around. However, he did not attack Sandra. He shoved her and continued his attack on Charla. Sandra then tried to hit him with a shovel, but he would not stop. Sandra grabbed the knife again and stabbed Travis in the back, but even then he did not stop attacking. Charla could hear the sound of her own bones breaking. Travis tore off her left hand. Sandra realized she would be next. She got into her car and locked herself inside. She called the police. Again, on the other end of the line, the operator tried to calm her down, saying that the police were already on their way. She felt as if her heart were stuck in her throat. The first officer to arrive was Officer Frank. He found Travis walking around the yard, while Charla lay on the ground, unconscious with her clothes torn and her body covered in blood. The enraged chimpanzee began circling the police car, looking for an open door. Inside the vehicle, Frank was terrified. Travis, weighing nearly 240 pounds, broke the passenger side window and unlocked the door. With no alternative, the officer fired for shots. Wounded, Travis staggered into the house, climbed onto his bed, and took his last breath. In the months that followed, Charla underwent several surgeries to reconstruct her face. Her left hand had been torn off, and 3 fingers on her right hand were also destroyed. Her injuries were so severe that the medical team caring for her required psychological support due to the trauma of treating such a brutal case. The toxicology report revealed that Travis had been given doses of a medication that might have increased his aggression. Others believe that Charla had changed her hair, its color and style, which may have caused Travis not to recognize her. In addition, she was holding his favorite toy, which may have startled or triggered him. Whatever the cause of the attack, Charla still lives with the trauma and the scars. This was one of the worst chimpanzee attacks ever recorded. In the early 60s, St. James and his girlfriend Amos, or Ladonna, as she was also called, were feeling the pressure of the relationship. In West Covina, California, they had already been together since high school, so their families wanted them to get married soon. James, however, more than Amos, had many ambitions and did not want to abandon his dreams. He wanted to be a race driver. He was passionate about cars. He felt that a marriage could prevent him from pursuing his desires. However, in '66, he gave in and the wedding was scheduled. On the wedding day, in a small church in town, everything happened as it should. Everything except James, who didn't show up. Amos, abandoned at the altar and embarrassed, ended up gaining the sympathy of those present, and soon the news spread throughout the city. James's greatest love was cars, but now he had managed to earn everyone's hatred. His bad gesture caused him to be poorly received in stores and other places. Because of all this negative repercussion, he decided to take action. James discovered an opening for a sailor on a merchant ship. It was a long trip, but all expenses would be covered by the company. He dove headfirst into this opportunity. In the following months, he traveled the world on the large vessel. This was his first international trip, and soon it would change his life forever. When the ship approached the coast of Africa, they were forced to stop in Tanzania due to technical problems. The entire crew disembarked and stayed at a base near a tribe of Tanzanians. On a certain day, the men of the tribe went out to hunt and James went with them. They killed a female chimpanzee, leaving her baby alive. James was moved and decided he would take care of the baby. When the ship was finally repaired, James boarded carrying the animal with him. He named him Mo and became attached to him. Back in his hometown, his mother appeared at the airport along with Ladonna. She was still angry about the wedding fiasco, but she still had feelings for James. However, when she noticed the chimpanzee in James's arms, she interacted with him. It was an exotic and different animal, enough to spark her curiosity. Soon, his mother and Ladonna also fell in love with Mo, and the couple ended up getting back together. In June of 1970, they were married in a modest ceremony. By all appearances, Mo had changed James in such a way that he had become another person. However, not so good things began to happen. Ladonna was diagnosed with cancer and needed to undergo a hysterectomy, a gynecological surgical procedure that consists of the total or partial removal of the uterus. For someone who wanted to be a mother like her, it was devastating. She considered asking for a divorce, given her sadness. Ladonna would never be able to have children. James, however, didn't leave her and consoled her, saying they already had a son. Thus, the couple began treating Mo with even more affection. The chimpanzee ate at the table, in a special chair, and walked all around the house. They knew that Mo would not be the same as a child, but they ignored that. It was something complicated and painful. However, as the days passed, signs began to appear showing that Mo was not the solution to their problems. In August of 1998, a man came to fix the enclosure where Mo slept inside the house. The man ended up, unintentionally, leaving an exposed wire, and Mo was shocked. He got scared and ran away. James and Ladonna called the police to find him. The officers, however, couldn't capture him easily. Mo ended up injuring one of them. The primate was then returned to the couple. A year later, a friend came to meet the animal and also ended up slightly injured. After that, news about Mo's violent behavior spread and the city officials considered him dangerous. The police were sent to take the animal away. However, upon arriving at the house, James resisted and was restrained. When they entered the house, the officers confronted the chimpanzee, who threatened to attack. Mo screamed furiously, but before he could advance, he was hit by a tranquilizer dart. In 2000 for St. James, and Ladonna managed to transfer Mo to a large, private sanctuary, where the couple could visit him without restrictions. It was a designated place with enclosures, where the primates had space to move around and could sometimes interact with each other. On Mo's birthday in 2005, the couple put toys and gifts in the car and went to visit him. It was a long trip to the sanctuary, but they didn't mind. When they arrived, they went to meet the chimpanzee, who became excited. Ladonna brought a cake and placed it on an improvised table. It was a family celebration. However, another chimpanzee appeared in the distance and began approaching them. This wasn't normal, and Ladonna realized he did not have good intentions. Suddenly, he decided to attack and charge toward Amos. She ran and the animal chased her. St. James ran after the two. The primate caught up to Ladonna and punched her in the back, knocking her down. He also managed to bite one of her hands, tearing off one of her fingers. But he wanted more. James managed to grab her and put her under a concrete table. She screamed desperately. The chimpanzee was out of control. James knew they were in danger. However, the situation became even worse. Another strange chimpanzee, taller and stronger, appeared. James knew this one was more dangerous. The two attacked James. The man let out a terrifying scream. He used all his strength to push the beasts away, but they were too strong. One of them sank its teeth into James's face and shoved its fingers into his eye. The chimpanzees continued to mutilate James, biting his face and tearing off his fingers. His face became unrecognizable and his teeth were ripped out, unconscious on the ground. The primates then began biting his buttocks and tearing off his genitals. Ladonna couldn't leave where she was, or she would be next. She could only scream, desperate that someone would show up at any moment. Mo had run away in fear. Her screams alerted people, who called one of the sanctuary's supervisors. Finally, armed men went to the site of the attack. They fired, but the guns were small and had no effect. One of them ran back and grabbed a rifle, then returned. He shot the larger one in the head, killing him instantly. The other primate began dragging James's limp body with him, but again the shooter fired. The animal was hit and fell to the ground. When the ambulance arrived, they saw the damage. James was unrecognizable, his face reduced to a hole filled with blood. Even with their work experience, the paramedics were in shock at such brutality. At the hospital, the doctors performed surgeries and reconstructed his face as best as they could. An investigation began, and they discovered that the caretakers had accidentally left some enclosures open. James was now completely dependent on Ladonna. His injuries limited him so much that he couldn't do simple things. Even so, the couple still visited Mo regularly. In 2007, Mo disappeared after escaping from his enclosure. Officers searched for him, but found nothing. After months, they realized they would never find him again. After the attack and Mo's disappearance, the couple was never the same. They considered him a son, and now he had vanished. A great sadness fell over them. James needed 24-hour care, and Ladonna was already elderly. Their older neighbors, with whom they had been friends, died of old age. In 2018, St. James died. Ladonna was left alone, with only the memories and living in the house where she had spent her whole life with St. James and Mo. She began struggling with depression. Her situation became known, and vandals appeared and stole her belongings, drained her bank account. The couple never had much money, but they had received $4 million from the attack. Ladonna became completely vulnerable. The people who appeared claiming to help were actually scamming her and stealing her things. Her relatives were too far away to help, and the closest ones had also passed away. The few neighbors who sympathized with Ladonna's story called the police to report the vandals who entered the house to steal. Ladonna, now 80 years old, was transferred from a hospital to a specialized institution for people with cognitive impairments. Although Mo was not the direct cause of the attack, he was the key factor that led to it. Besides that, he had injured some people during his youth. Even if Mo had not been taken to the sanctuary, he himself could have attacked the couple, since he had a strong temperament. In any case, taking Mo from the wild was a choice that brought devastating consequences.